Just at the high school. But they're losing 6-1.
They actually play there?
He's in 9th grade now.
They still, I didn't know they actually use
The
that.
9th grade and he plays there. The varsity team plays at Allen.
9th grade, but not JV.
And I think the 9th and 10th grade teams play there. And I think JV and varsity play at Allen. That's how it works. Now it's 8-1. So. All right. We're on. We're live. Welcome. All right. Well, welcome to the ISD 191 Legislative Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, April the 26th, 2022. And we'll get started on our relatively short agenda. Welcome, Directors Miller and Director Word.
Thank you.
Welcome, Dr. Battle and Lisa. Good to have everybody here. I think the first agenda item is an update about the exemption for the sale of property, potential sale of property.
My name is Lisa Ryder to join me. Thank you, Director Hume, Director Ward, and Director Miller. So, as you are aware.
Is your microphone on? Okay. I'm sure they can hear it, I just.
As you are aware, the legislative session just returned from the spring break. And so we wanted to give you an update of where they landed with our exemption right before they went on spring break, and then any additional information we received today.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. What we know is that as they went into the spring break, we knew that it was sitting in a finance committee to possibly be discussed, but it wasn't required to be discussed to be included in any future bill. So therefore, we're really at that point where the House has their bill out there. You can read in it our lines within that omnibus bill. I do not see one for the Senate at this point in time. They don't have one out there on the left for that purpose. But we know that there's that conversation that's going to happen here between the governor, the House, and Senate. And ultimately, when you have language in both houses, House and Senate, then the hope is that that follows through in the final omnibus bill. And that's where we're just waiting for that process to work its way through. We have contacted our legislators' offices to inquire if there's any additional need. We did hear back that there wasn't any additional need with regard to us testifying, for example, and things of that nature. It's really a matter more of just waiting for that process to work its way through. And it's a bit bigger than just our portion of that bill, right?
So you've seen the House Omnibus Bill, at least?
Say that again?
You have seen the House Omnibus Bill?
I have,
At least in
yes.
passing. I assume you didn't read it cover to cover. But
No, but you can pull it up, you can type in
Yeah.
on the Control F Burnsville, and it takes you right to our lines.
Well, my question was, are there many other, call them riders, I don't know what these are, lines that are like ours, sort of unique, and there's,
Specific to districts.
Yeah, it's.
not even districts. What I'm concerned about is if someone decides to make a compromise, hey, let's cut things or something, to get to ours, I would hope that it'd be they'd have to be digging around quite a lot, right? I mean.
Well, and typically that's going to occur when it comes to what dollars are we going to include or not include. And
Well, there's
since
no
ours
dollars
really
associated.
doesn't include any dollars from them,
Yeah,
I don't
Okay.
foresee that being an issue for us.
okay.
So we're on track. It's a wait and see game. So,
Did-
check in.
Did the final language require us to list anything about the sale cost or demonstrating the sale or anything like that? So it's still, it's an open-ended arrangement.
Hold it in.
Remind me of the deadline, the legislature is, isn't it late May sometime?
May
It's right.
23rd.
Yeah, I think it's somewhere
May
around there.
23rd.
Okay, that's what I was, so like the week before Memorial Day, approximately.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
That's good.
All right. The other agenda item for this evening is Dr. Battle and I, when we talked a week or so ago, we thought, given that this committee has, given that we had a short agenda tonight and this committee has been around for a little over 3 years, it seemed like a good time to take a step back and just among this group talk about are we meeting the goals that were originally set for the legislative committee, or things we could be doing better or differently. So I thought we would maybe spend a few minutes talking about that this evening. So the committee was established in January of 2019 with the purpose to guide the board's advocacy work on behalf of the district. So that's a pretty broad statement, I realize, and since then we met with, I think, every one of our state level legislators and at least one of our Congress people. Obviously, we've been working on this legislative exemption, and we've had the legislative platform that we've done the last few years. So I guess my question for the group is, how do you all feel like the committee is doing? What do you think is working well so far in our relatively short time as a committee?
Just because, actually, I think I was the first chair.
Where?
Okay. I couldn't remember if somebody preceded
I was
me.
on it with you, so that's how I remember.
So if you remember right, we kind of, and we didn't quantify this, but we established a 3-tier objective for this group. And the first, I don't know what order they were in, but I remember the first being to be a peer-to-peer interaction point between the school board and our legislative fellows. And that, I think, we continue to do quite well.
If I remember correctly, that was one of the impetuses for putting together the group, because most other districts had this sort of a group at the time, and we're one of the few that didn't, and our legislators.
Yeah, we had legislators asking for it,
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
The other two were that we would use it to speak out if the board wanted to reach out, either in sort of standard interaction, i.e. Consistently advocating for more funding, et cetera, or specifically like we have done with the exemption process. And I think the third, if I remember right, was the opportunity to be the recipient of anything coming in from the legislative community. I don't know that that's been a necessity or has occurred, but for instance, if there was a, hot activity around discussions or whatever they might decide they need to talk about outside of funding, use of bathrooms, or Florida's a terrible usage of book judgment, et cetera. We would be the first point that would come to, rather than an open just conversation in front of the board. So, and have an opportunity to discuss that and then prepare it for conversation with the board.
I forgot about that third one, because you're right, I don't think that's really happened.
No, I don't think
Very
so.
much.
We haven't
Yeah.
had anything they've come to us about. Although they've made inquiries about, like, how are things going, right? And we've had some, and the visits we've had have been very productive in that sense. In fact, I remember one of the first visits, I don't remember which, was one of the senators came, and he had a lot of misperceptions that he had heard from the community. And we had, that was around the school closings, I think, at the time and stuff. So overall, I think this has served that purpose quite well.
Yeah, I mean, being that this was one of my first committee assignments, I've really enjoyed having that interaction with our legislators and learning about what they're passionate about, and if, because I think it's a two-way street, what, is there something, we can help them with too, and, just because it makes for good community relations. But I am interested too, because I really haven't heard a lot about, like, what other districts do with their legislative committees. Like, is it different? Do they do the exact same thing that we do, or do they use it for different purposes than we do? Is there something we could be doing that we're not doing?
Right. Well, some of the other districts, this is actually part of how Dr. Battle and I decided to have this on the agenda for tonight, is when we were talking, I brought up that I had seen in the paper, I think it was 196, is soliciting, I think it's called an advocacy committee, is different. They have board members who are on it, but they also have, I think, staff, members of the community, and And that got me thinking, oh, we don't do that, but, so that's one example is, and I think they do more direct advocacy, like maybe mobilizing the community or mobilizing the parents, the families in the district.
Maybe that's more in line with the advisory committees that occur in our schools.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one example of what I have heard that one of the neighboring districts does.
I'd be a little concerned expanding this committee to that level in the sense that we would lose a little bit of the focus that we have. We have, if we're just three kind of things we're covering, and one of them we almost never touch on.
Right.
We're pretty narrowly focused, and I think that serves a good purpose. I would be worried that if we open that door up, then there'd be just almost too much going on. Those kinds, an advisory committee would not be something I would necessarily turn down overall.
Right.
But turning this into that.
Turning the board piece into the starts to blur the lines a little bit, maybe.
Yes, well, absolutely, yeah. That's a whole other conversation, yes. But turning this particular legislative committee into that would.
Right.
But interestingly, to your question, Anna, what about inviting somebody to join us to have one of our committee meetings appear from one of a district around, or we go to one of their committee meetings?
That's an interesting
And
idea.
just an opportunity to learn both ways.
Since we share a lot of the same interests and frankly, a lot of the same legislators.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could also do a little research on what other committees do, too, just to share with you, because that was very unique.
Or, if
Right.
they have a committee, if it is structured similar, they have a committee with a chair, you can arrange a conversation, an interview, so to speak, and just go from
Right.
chair to chair, or, again, do it that, or you could have them come to one of our meetings, we could just openly have a conversation, or we could go to one of their meetings and sit and listen.
I don't recall because it was my first month on the school board and I was a little overwhelmed at that moment, but did we talk to MSBA at all about how other districts use their legislative type committees?
I don't
recall that coming up, but like I said.
If we did, I'm not sure that it was.
Because that might be another thing for us
That would be
to.
my first stop for the research I was referring
Yeah.
to.
Well, you saying that is what made maybe MSBA, they probably have all kinds of information that we could, because certainly they have advocacy, they do a lot of advocacy work, and they probably have a lot of information about what some of the other legislative committees. From my perspective, I feel like we've done a good job overall of articulating our platform each year, of pretty regularly meeting. I think we've met with most of our legislators at least once a year over the last 3 years. Several of them have been to multiple meetings at this point, which I think has been good. I think it has helped to have some of those relationships. I think what you brought up, that certainly at some of those earlier meetings, there were definitely some misperceptions and some perceptions of the district that maybe weren't completely accurate, and I think we've been able to help address some of those concerns and share more information. So I think that's been very important work that we've been able to do, and get our legislators to better understand some of our realities. So I feel good about that.
I guess on another level, I realize, a lot of this is more localized, but I really do find Angie Craig to be a good resource as far as at the federal level, just understanding what else is, because obviously education is a universal, national topic.
Right.
And there's so many things that, we could be doing more at the federal level.
Well, and she's been a big advocate for special education funding in particular,
Yes.
which is something
Yeah.
that is a huge issue in, pretty much every school district.
Right, and that's one of our legislative platforms.
Exactly.
So it's like, maybe is there a bigger conversation we can have with Angie? And I don't know if there's collaboration with other districts or something, just to see what can we do to push something like that forward, not just at the state level, but at the federal level, to get more backing. I mean, how do you, I know that's kind of really fair, but so if it doesn't have, if you don't have the conversation, it
Right.
doesn't have a chance.
And her office is right across the street, isn't it?
It's close by. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I think it is in Burnsville.
The first year I was here, there was a town hall hosted at one of our schools.
It was at Eagle Ridge, because I was there also.
Eagle Ridge.
Because it was right, it was like in February, it was just a couple weeks before things started to shut down.
So I think COVID prevented a lot of that.
Right.
There's a lot more in our district. Things seem to become a lot more. There's more opportunity to interact.
Yeah, that's a good point. For 2 of the 3 years this committee's been in place, we've had more limited opportunities to interact. Although, over the last year, like I said, most of our legislators have come in person, and we even had some that we met with virtually during the shutdown phase of the pandemic. So, and I think we've also seen that for some of the legislators, they actually prefer meeting virtually because of their schedules. So there have been some that we probably wouldn't have been able to meet with if not for Zoom. So that's, I think, a valuable lesson perhaps, that when they're having to drive, because we've had some last minute cancellations also because they get called into a meeting at the Capitol, and being able to meet virtually works out better for their schedules sometimes.
Yeah.
Is there anything you all can think of that could be better or that we might be able to do that would help us more effectively deliver on the purpose of the committee in the months to come? Keep on keeping on?
No, I, putting it in perspective, I don't believe that state law requires us to have any committees.
It's probably true.
So boards will fluctuate between the number of committees. I mean, this board at one time had a technology committee, finance committee, a lot of different committees that don't exist anymore.
Right.
And I think at the end of the day, determining whether or not the need is there and what's being accomplished versus the time it takes for 3 board members to get together and another hour out of the week, whatever, that's really the bar. I mean,
Right.
The rest of it is seeing how we can do the best with it. But and I would argue that we are fully meeting that bar,
Mm-hmm.
the necessity for it to exist. So.
Good.
Well, and I know that there's, talk across other states, and maybe we don't even have to worry about this because we're more blue, but you hear about these states where they're passing these laws that say, oh, you can't teach critical race theory, and it's like, which is not a thing in schools anyway, but I mean, do we have anything to be concerned about here? I mean, is that something anybody in our legislation could say, hey, this might be something we need to be concerned about? Or even the don't say gay thing that's in Florida, I mean, that's having effects on schools. I mean, I'm hoping, but, you just never know when somebody's gonna try and put something
Right.
into.
Again, that's the third point I brought up. That's the purpose, is hopefully this committee would be a rapid response, first stop for something that came up and needed to be evaluated by this board, rather than, getting blindsided by it and having to react.
Right, and if something like that came out, that would be a signal to us perhaps to proactively reach out to our legislators and let them know how something like that would impact our schools and our students and our staff. And so, yeah, I think that would be definitely something to do. One thought I did have is with it being an election year, I was thinking of the timing of our legislative platform. It's an election year, and for us and for the legislature. And what we've learned in the past is the earlier in the session that they get that platform, the better. So we'll need to really think that through later in the year, how early we're able to get a platform for next year to our legislators so that they have it as early in the new session as possible. Because I think this year was it February or March, I think, when we finalized it, and which was fine for this year, but in a budget year right after an election, the earlier we can get it done, the better. So that might be something to put on the radar for late this fall and first part of the winter.
Okay.
maybe work towards having some sort of a draft in place by, I don't know, January-ish, so that the first meeting of of next year's legislative committee could hopefully have a draft that they could review pretty early on.
Okay.
So that's one thought I had. But otherwise, excellent. Anything else that we want to talk about? Either this or something else?
No.
All right.
Well,
Well, yeah, yeah.
who do we have up for visitors? Do we have anybody
I
out?
don't know that we have any currently scheduled. We
Okay.
had, who was at the last time we had was, I think Senator Duckworth, I think was the last meeting, which was January or February was the last one where we had one of our legislators in attendance. Because I think when they're in the heart of the session, it's hard to get them to.
And
Understand.
then, as you know, there are some who are already against, they aren't running again, so we'll definitely have some new
Yep.
that cross in.
So we need to, we visit this every time election, as a committee, set some ground rules on that. Are we going to entertain candidates, or do we entertain elected officials only?
Good point.
Right.
And I don't need that answer tonight, but we should think about
It
that.
is something to think about for this fall.
Yeah. I think we did not entertain candidates previously.
We did not, and whatever that was, 2020. Well, but that was also an odd, fall of 2020 was an odd time just in general.
Mhm.
So, but that is something to keep in mind because we might get that question from a candidate.
Mhm.
So maybe we want to put that, let's think about it and let's pencil it in on the agenda maybe for the next meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
At least to talk about it, maybe not be ready to make a decision, but I think it would be a good conversation to have before we get asked.
Yep.
Because you're right, it'll happen. All right, if there's nothing else, then we will adjourn for the evening at
All right, thank you.
6:22. All right.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
See you all